Okay, I think we're live. I know it always takes a minute for it to show up on YouTube, so I'm gonna give it a second. Yeah. I feel like it takes like about 30 seconds or so. Oh, here we go. Okay, I think we're going great. Okay, so hello everybody who is here. Thank you for joining. We are gonna have a kind of last minute discussion. So we're going to be talking about consumerism and book hauls and book buying, a lot of different topics with a lot to discuss on Booktube. And so thank you so much, everybody who is joining me tonight. I think we have different opinions and different approaches to the way that we manage this issue. And part of this is a topic that I feel like comes up frequently, like every couple of months on YouTube. Yeah. And week in the last couple of days, it's come up again on Book Twitter, I think in response to a very large book haul video from a larger booktuber. Hi, I'm seeing people in the comments. Hi, Rachel. Hi, Mara. Hey, guys.
Hey, guys.
Okay, so I'm gonna have everybody go around and introduce themselves. We may be getting Joshana joining us a little bit later, hopefully, but she's got like a prior commitment, so hopefully when she's done, she can join us. So if you guys want to go around and introduce yourselves, kind of where people can find you, their channels are all linked down below if you guys want to follow them, maybe a little bit about the kind of stuff you read, and pronouns if you want to share them. Yeah, and then we'll kind of get into this. And you guys probably know me. I'm Bethany. You're on my channel. I go use she, her pronouns, and I read a little bit of everything, lots of romance, sci-fi, and fantasy. And we can go clockwise. Cami.
Hi, I'm Cami from Cami's Corner. I primarily read horror. I do read in other genres, but horror is my niche. And you can find me under Cami's Corner here in the YouTube platform. And I use that handle everywhere else in Bookstagram, Twitter, and that's pretty much all I use these days.
I'm Margaret Pinard. I'm an indie author who's just starting out in Booktube. So Margaret is my name, and then Taste Life Twice is my handle on Twitter because that's my publishing company. I've got 5 books of historical fiction because that's my favorite genre. But for Booktube, to start out with a bang, I'm doing daily videos on a Proust book tag. So it's just a questionnaire I got from Paris because why not start there?
Hi, I'm Kate. I'm from the channel Chapter Kate. There's a Roman numeral joke in there somewhere, but it's pronounced Chapter Kate. I talk about a lot of fantasy and science fiction, but also mental health because I'm a music therapist and I work in an inpatient psychiatric facility. And I also talk about my own mental health because I have bipolar disorder and PTSD. So it's a huge topic on my channel and things. So I'm excited to talk about this topic.
And I'm Jade from Bedtime Bookworm. That's my channel name here on YouTube. And then I also have an Instagram and Twitter, although the Bookworm is just without the 2 O's. It's BK Worm on Instagram and Twitter. It's all linked under my YouTube channel. And I read mostly sci-fi and fantasy, mostly fantasy and followed by sci-fi. But I do dabble in other genres like historical fiction and horror. And I read a mix of YA and adult on my channel.
Sweet. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Okay, so kind of to get started with the conversation, and there's a lot we can talk about here, and we're going to, but kind of as a place to start, how do you approach, and I'll talk a little bit about, for me, how do you approach book hauls and book buying on your channel and for yourself personally? Because there's a lot of different ways to do this. For those of you who watch my stuff, you probably know I monthly book hauls. They tend to be on the larger side. Some of them I buy for myself, some of them are from publishers. I also read a lot of books. I read an average of like 25 books a month, sometimes more. And so like that for me factors into it. And I have a lot of other kind of criteria, and we can talk more about how we approach buying books, how it's changed since being on Booktube, because I know for me it has definitely changed. I'm probably, especially this year, I've been more selective about what books I'm buying, where it's often either something I've already read and I loved and think I'm likely to reread, an author that I want to financially support, or something for like a project I'm working on, like some kind of a video project. So that tends to be it, though occasionally it'll be other stuff too. So that's how I've handled things, but anybody else?
I didn't know if we wanted to
I'll
go
jump in since I was first on the other round. For me, I think that I've changed. I think that I've changed the way that I buy books now than when I first started, and I think that that happens to us as creators. For me, when I first integrated into the Booktube community, I think that I had an overwhelming sense of, in order to belong, in order to get noticed, in order to make a mark, I had to be reading what everybody else was reading. And I think that tends to happen to most people when they get involved in the community. And I think that's a big reason why this conversation gets started the way that it does. But I think that if you're true to the reader that you are, and you kind of just focus on what you like to read, then that anxiety eventually goes away, or it should. You should never feel pressure to buy the latest and greatest book, or the book you feel like everybody else is reading. And I really think that goes to who you're following or who you subscribe to also, because I know for me that also was a underlying factor in the beginning. I was subscribed to these booktubers that had these giant platforms, and so although it seems like they're buying this massive amount of books, a lot of them already had deals with publishers or they were influencers, and I didn't know any of that then. And so that's another factor that I think some people forget, is that book hauls sometimes include these. And I think it's very important for us as creators to be very transparent as to where we are purchasing, or if we're purchasing these books. You know, if we're getting them for free, or we're, you know, a influencer or a representative for something, I think that we need to let our audience know, so they don't feel that pressure if they are that type of a viewer that feels, oh, I gotta go out and get this, or I gotta go out and subscribe to this, because that should never be the case. I mean, my book collection has grown exponentially since becoming a creator on this platform, but just like Bethany said, a lot of the buying that I'm doing now is very specific for projects or buddy reads or things that I'm working on. So as a collector, I don't feel bad about consuming the amount of media that I do, but I'm a lot more cautious as to what I add to my collection, like what I'm going to keep. And I don't mind giving things away either, and giveaways and stuff like that, but I'm sure we'll get into all that.
Yeah, I definitely think that you
say we're getting allotments, which is great. But
yeah, I was just saying, as far as the
like probably delay.
Maybe there's a delay. We keep talking over each other. But I was going to speak to the transparency piece. Yeah. I think that's really important. I also tried really hard to make it clear where I get my books from, particularly because I'm not a big book buyer. I'm more on the lower buying side. So I do book hauls twice a year currently. I probably could do them quarterly, but I just kind of choose not to. And in my hauls and in, you know, actually my wrap-ups, I always say where I got the book from, because I want people to know, because I am such a huge library user, that I want them to know you can have a Booktube channel and get most of your books from the library. And in my last book haul, I actually got a lot of books for free from various places, and I talked about that, and I got a few comments like, oh, those were some really great tips on how to get books for free. So I think it's important for people to know that, and it became more important to me as I started my channel and reading more, because I was reading more than I used to. I couldn't afford to buy as many, like I used to buy a lot more of what I read, because I wasn't reading as much. And I don't read as much as Bethany. I probably read like 60 to 70 books a year. But yeah, as I started reading more, I realized I couldn't buy as much as I wanted to. And when I first started booktubing, I was trying to buy Like I switched to the mentality of buying books that I'd already read and loved because I wanted to reread them. But then the longer I've been doing BookTube, I found that I actually don't really reread books. And so that's fallen off of my policy of how to buy books. And I actually don't buy very many books these days because of that.
So I have input, I guess. So for that, I don't really film hauls often. I buy a lot of books, but I don't film hauls as often as I purchase books. But a big part of that is because with one of my diagnoses with bipolar disorder, a huge factor to that is when you're manic, you buy a lot of stuff, you overspend, and that's a huge symptom that, you know, I experience and a lot of people with bipolar disorder experience. And so a lot of times when I make these huge purchases of a ton of books, it's kind of almost a point of shame, so I don't really talk about it as much. But then at some point it's like I want to also share because I did enjoy getting these things, so I do want to share about it. But I have recently, I had one big haul, and instead of filming it one big video, I filmed 3 smaller videos, and I made a point to, you know, kind of give a disclaimer at the beginning about it being, you know, book collecting is a separate hobby for me than reading. And so I made a point of saying that, and then also saying that, you know, you don't have to have a ton of books to, you know, to be a valid reader and to explore a ton of worlds and all these, you know, things like that. But also with my hauls, a lot of them do come from secondhand stores. Not all of it's about 50-50. But a lot of it does come from secondhand stores. But I do purchase a lot of books because I don't, I like to have physical things to hold, and I'm also a mood reader, so I like to almost like move my hand over the books and be like, which one calls to me? So that's a part of it. But it has changed a little bit since I started BookTube because I don't feel like I have to hold on to books I don't like as of recent. Because I was like, if I get rid of these though, I can get credit to get more. And so it kind of is a weird relationship at the moment, but that's kind of how I've approached it recently.
I really like your distinction between book collecting and being a reader, because that's definitely applies to me in the sense that I'm not a book collector. I don't feel, and obviously like no shame to people who like to collect books. Like I think that's great, but that's just isn't me. And I do think that a lot of people think you have to be that way to be a booktuber. And like, that's just not true. That there's all kinds of booktubers out there, you know, all kinds of readers.
Absolutely.
I mean, and I said that to Bethany when. Sorry,
I think we have a delay on some of these, but I, you know, I absolutely agree. I think that like there are people who are more minimalist, and I think that's fine. I'm a big reader and I'm a collector, so I will collect like multiple editions of some of my favorites, but it's everything. It's like specific things. And Margaret, I know you have not had a chance to.
I was going to jump back in. So I used to work in a secondhand bookstore that was awesome. So I got a lot of secondhand books there because you got a discount. So there's that to layer on there. But I tend to go in spurts of like, oh, this is such a great opportunity to buy books, and then go, okay, hunker down. Like, don't spend any of the books for several months, and then I break, you know. But my approach to this, upon learning that it was like a regular tag to do in the community, was kind of like, I don't really like the feel of that, because I feel like it's, to use a modern phrase, like performative in some of the ways that people do it in a way I don't like. And to use the old phrase, it's conspicuous consumption. So it's one of those things where I'm like, okay, this isn't what I want to provide as a feeling to people. I'm kind of more about the like digging into old treasures and the secondhand and the what do you have buried under your table leg or whatever. Just pull it out and see what treasure you already have, because that's kind of my angle.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting because I think you can have such a different approach to things. Like for me, especially now, I read so much front list. And so a lot of why I make book hauls is, I mean, sometimes it's like things I've discovered and things I want to tell people about. And sometimes it's like, hey, here's what publishers are sending me or things I've requested. Here's some of the new things you might be interested in, as like a service of like, here are books that are coming out or like that you might not be aware of. Here, you know, like totally, I guess that's kind of, yeah. Which like, you know, but like, you know, and maybe the intention is part of it. Like for me, the intention, not like, ooh, look at all the books I have. It's like, hey, here's some of what I'm interested in reading soon. And hey, here's like some books that you might want to know about that are coming out, and I don't know.
I kind of had a similar. Go ahead, Jane.
I was going to say, when I do hauls, I always, some people when they do hauls, they give a pretty thorough synopsis of the book, or they'll read part of the synopsis. And I, try to give an idea, a rough idea of what the book might be about, but I try to focus more on why I bought the book and why I'm interested in reading it, and not necessarily what the story is about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm similar. I forgot what I was gonna say. It's okay. But no, I feel like I just remembered it. I'm similar. I kind of want them to talk about the book if they're gonna say it, and I definitely, with me, similar. I don't want to, be like, hey, go buy these books. Hey, look at all the things I own, even though I do like to have a nice backdrop. But it's more like, I found these things. I'm really excited about, having found this because I didn't know about it, or, something like that. So for me, it's more like, I want to share my excitement,
Yeah.
Cami, I know you're a big collector.
No, I was just going to add to a couple of things that were said. One, Margaret had said she had worked in a bookstore, and I wanted to speak to that because when I was young, I was probably about 21, 22, and I worked for a retail bookstore. And at the time, I had 2 shelves of books that I left my parents' home with. By the time my 5-year span of working for that retail bookstore was done, I had 2 bookshelves worth of books. And, that definitely needs to be spoken to, because I know a lot of creators work in libraries, they work at retail outlets, they work at secondhand bookstores, and it makes it exceptionally easier to consume media that way, because you get a discount, and that needs to be stated. For the retail outlet that I work for, I got 30% off. When you get 30% off, you're like, heck yes, I can take 5 of those books home, and I don't take the paycheck home. In addition to that, I think that my age has a big factor too. I'm going to be 40 next year, and I've been collecting books pretty much my entire life. So that said, my precious commodity are the books that I carry, and I've moved multiple times, and every time the biggest complaint from movers is, my God, how many books do you have, woman? Seriously, who needs this many books? But my books are precious to me. And and I tell people, when I said I had a lot of books, I meant I had a small library. I think I found Alexandria at some point in my life. But, point being, there's a million things I could spend my hard-earned money on. I own my own business, which I'm very proud of. And that money, I don't need to contribute it, thank goodness, anywhere else in my life. And I'm fortunate that I'm able to spend that money the way I see fit. And I could buy Louis Vuitton purses. I could buy, a Louboutin pumps for $600 a pair, but I choose to buy books. And in addition to the media that I consume, a lot of media, it sometimes appears that maybe my book hauls are really vast and very large, but I have a mix. I use my library. I go to retail outlets, but I'm very cautious on buying brand new books, especially since the pandemic. The cost of books has risen exponentially, and most retail outlets aren't offering coupons or discounts like they normally do. And I love thrifting, and being that my niche is horror, a lot of the books that I buy are mass market paperbacks from 25 or 30 years ago, and I have no other way to buy them. However, thank you, Grady Hendrix, for publishing Paperbacks from Hell, because what a book would have once cost me 25 cents in a secondhand store is now running me on average about $25. So again, I budget for my books, but I'm not going to say sorry for buying something that I love. That's all.
Yeah. You have to really love having books to if you're going to move a lot. So definitely commend you on that, because having moved a lot in my past is one of the reasons why I don't have a big book collection, because I don't enjoy moving a lot of books. They're a pain in the butt to move. And so I think that's awesome that you have moved a lot of books because you love them so much. And that's the whole point, right? You should spend money on the things that you love. And if you Yeah. Moving books, or if you love books enough to be comfortable or want to move them multiple times, then you should be happy to own them.
Yeah.
We recently moved into our first house, and we already had like a small library, but now we also like on the top floor decided to have a library. So we recently had that whole pain of trying to move, but it's also a collected, it's something that me and my husband share. It's both of our libraries, and it's a shared hobby as well. So
yeah, I think that's important because my husband is not a reader and didn't really grow up like when I suggested I put a bookshelf in our living room, he was like, I don't think bookshelves belong in the living room. And I was like, what?
They belong everywhere.
A big part of his childhood or his hobby. Like, it's not that he's against it. He's just like, that sounds weird. And I'm like, it sounds good not to have it, So I think having, a partner or a family that is also interested plays a big part too. I think if he was into books, that we would probably buy a lot more.
There's a comment about my friends have stopped moving me 20 years ago, and I'm in that camp, but only like 8 years ago. Like I was using friends to move all around DC, and then I came out to Portland and moved a couple times, and then they were like, nope. So yeah, I know what that's like.
Yeah. I mean, I've moved also cross country with lots of books, and I will say, and I think that this is something Cami said, and we've had some comments, is that I do think that like age and place in life and ability to purchase books plays a role. Like I know for me, I'm 33. I have a family. I have some disposable income that I can use to buy more books. And I didn't used to, I grew up using my library almost exclusively. Like we just didn't have the money to buy very many books. And so it was like a treat when I got to. And so now I'm able to purchase more. And, this is another thing I think is interesting to talk about is for me now, I also think about it as having the capability of supporting authors as artists. And, there are ways to do that beyond just physical books. But for me, some of it, like believing in the importance of publishing, and some of that too, believing in the importance of marginalized authors getting paid for the work that they're doing and having a voice in publishing. And so sometimes the books that I'll buy, even if I don't keep them turn, I'll resell them to an indie or something, like it's partly because I want to support authors that I think are doing good work. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I struggle with as someone who doesn't buy a lot of books. And when I do buy books, I try to buy them cheaply. Is this whole thing about supporting authors. Like I do want to support authors, but I also don't want to have a bunch of books in my house that I just look at and don't, read, because that's just the type of reader that I am. And the way that I've kind of, made myself feel okay about it is that I do have this platform where I talk about books and talk about the things that I love. And so in that way, I'm promoting, the authors that I want to promote. Obviously not directly the way people who actually, buy books do. But I also am often asking my library to purchase books from authors that I want to support as well. And so there are other ways to do it. I definitely commend people who actually, spend their money and put money in directly into authors' pockets, because I think that's really important. And I feel bad sometimes that that's something I choose not to do. But it doesn't make sense for me when I don't get joy out of owning books. Like I get joy from reading books, but I don't get joy from owning them personally.
Yeah. If I can just like tell you guys that you do such a service as booktubers to promote authors already. So don't ever feel bad about not buying the book, because it's the publicity that the authors are like, please, somebody talk about my book. It's great. It's really, really awesome. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we're getting a lot of great comments on this. Yeah, and that there are a lot of ways of doing this: requesting books from your library, leaving reviews, shouting on social media, that even if you can't afford to purchase books, like I'm at a point in my life and the kind of person who likes having books, that like I can buy some. And so I do. But like even if you can't do that, you can still be a reader, a book lover, a booktuber. You can support authors in other ways. And I think normalizing that is important.
Mm-hmm. I want to speak to two of those points. One that about going to the library and requesting from your library, because I live in a very rural area, so I'm actually very far from my public library. And so I do use the Libby app as much as I possibly can. But when I go to request a book, since my library is so small and we are so rural, it doesn't always transcend into getting a book in a vast way. And so, you know, like I have a book that I requested 8 months ago that they probably haven't looked at. And also being that I have a very select niche and I usually request things that are gory and scary and about serial killers, they probably, you know, send like the SWAT team out at night to, you know, survey my home and to figure out if maybe I have a small cemetery in the back of my property, because everything I request is a little questionable. But I do try to use my library as much as possible and request as much as possible, because I know that is very important of getting authors' books on shelves that, you know, normally wouldn't be ordered. But, you know, we have to understand sometimes that we're not all in huge cities. You know, there's a handful of people in my city, and so I don't have that readily accessible. So I do have to look to other things. And there was something Bethany said that I was going to say something to, and I forgot. We'll move on. I'll come back to it. But that was the big thing. So
yeah, that's definitely a good point. And I'm super grateful and lucky that I have a really good library. My buying practices would be very different if I didn't have access to a lot of the books that I want to read through my library.
Yeah, definitely.
I remember the other thing now, supporting authors.
Okay.
You said supporting authors in a way that that's another thing that I think changes over time being a creator, is that you start to develop these relationships with publishing companies, with editors, with authors that you would have never in a million years expected to, you know, have these or to be afforded these opportunities. And I could not tell you how many times I've asked authors, how can I put more money in your pocket? How can I help, you know, give you the best bang for your buck for your art? And so often I am resorted to just go to Amazon. It's easier for me, it's easier for you. And it breaks my heart because I want to support these companies. But another thing that we have to be cognizant of when we have a book buying budget is if you only have, let's say your book buying budget is $20 a week. If we're going to go and look at indie bookstores, they can't compete with Amazon prices. And so sometimes it's down to, I need this book next week for a readathon, or I really need this for a buddy read. So you have to make that executive choice. Do I buy from an indie bookstore and support that indie bookstore, or do I just get it from Amazon? So I know that's a whole other can of worms and a whole other conversation possibly for another day, but I do try and support artists and, you know, the best way possible to get the most money in their pocket. But sometimes that's not always an option. And I realized, you know, that kind of piggybacks also off of what Jade said in buying books used. But if we're piggybacking now off of what Margaret said, if we're showcasing them on our channel and we're talking about them and we're bringing interest back to them, then you never know, you might start a whole new excitement for an older book.
Yeah. I think there's a lot happening in the comments that is really good. And I think it's important to talk about that, like, you know, being able to like offer patronage to authors is like from a place of privilege, and that like not, I mean, which we kind of mentioned, but like not everyone can do that. Also that libraries are not a thing in third world countries. You know, not everybody has access in the same ways or can, you know, afford to do that. And like that is also fine. And so I think it's an issue of like, how do we not promote this idea that this is what you need to do or have to do to be a reader, or to be a booktuber. But I don't know, like it's complicated, and especially in the economic climate right now, I think people are probably also more sensitive to it, which is what people are saying. And how do you think through like access to books and like it's a complicated issue, and I get why this spurs so much discussion regularly on Twitter. Everybody has some thoughts, but yeah.
I think one of the things we also need to remember as creators, though, is how fluid this community is. as we have, people that have been in this community since it started 7 years ago, I think we could say 7, 8 years ago when Booktube became a thing. But as many people that come into the platform, that many people leave. And so I think that what happens and why these types of conversations continue to surface and why we continue to rehash old topics is because these new creators come in and they see us, I kind of consider myself an old booktuber now. I've been on the platform for almost 4 years, and they kind of become overwhelmed with our big bookcases in the back and how many books we might be hauling or unhauling, and then they're like, oh, I don't like this person because they're just being snooty and they're just trying to show off of what they have, not knowing us completely and not knowing how much time we may have vested in this community and how many relationships we may have forged. And I think it's also important to pay respect to the new creators and give them the platform to have a voice. But I think they also need to be respectful and mindful that we're all in different economic situations. We're all in different areas of this community, and all of these points are valid. All of the points should be respected, but there's a respectful way to have a conversation. I'm just really exhausted logging onto Twitter, which should be a good, solid, happy place for us to share information about books and talk to each other and make friends. But we're always arguing with each other and shaming people for things that they love. If I choose to spend my money the way that I want to, and that's collecting books, then that's okay. And it's okay that you don't want to. And we need to respect people's spaces. It's such a catch-22 to be a book lover. That's the whole reason why I got into this community, was to find other people that love to read just as much as I do and talk to them and make friends with people, but not to be badgered by people that, come into the community new and be, making preconceived judgments about me, not knowing my history or not knowing why I do what I do. If we want to ask questions, then maybe start a conversation, but just be nice to people. How hard is that,
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm here to talk about how I don't buy a lot of books, but I think for me, my bottom line opinion is that people can spend money on what they want to, or what they, choose not to spend money on what they want to. And we should respect all of those things because it's their money and they can decide what they want to spend it on. I also want to say, while Cam was talking, I did giggle a little bit, and it was not because of what you were saying, but someone in the chat asked if my dog almost took me out. And that is exactly what happened. So I was laughing at that. I apologize. I have a new puppy. He's 3 months old and he's absolutely crazy. I opened the door and ran into me. So there we go.
I think a lot of the conversations when they get started on Twitter, it's often not necessarily people, shaming others for buying books, but how it's sort of framed in our presentation of those hauls. Are we just, saying, look at all these, or are we talking about them in depth? Are we, being transparent with how we purchase it, or are we not? Because I think a lot of people forget that, even though we might not consider ourselves influencers, we are influencing people that watch us, and I consistently tell the people I work with, my patients, you don't have any control over other people's actions. However, when you have a platform, you do influence other people's actions. So it's a balance. It's a kind of a hard balance sometimes.
Yeah. Margaret, any thoughts?
I'm just trying to watch the comments at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, there's a lot coming in. I think this is all great stuff that you guys are saying. A couple points ago, I guess, that I was gonna try to expand upon is the accessibility issue. So much of Booktube is about new books, and so that sort of requires hauls because you have to get it new, right? Like Bethany said. And so having information on that is a service for people when you're doing the explaining about the books and why you like them, because then people can judge if they'll like them. requesting them at the library, as you were talking about, Jade, is also a service, or Cami was saying that, for rural. So I think that these are a lot of issues that cut across different sections of the population that all find themselves as readers, that you can say, oh, well, I need access in this way, it needs to be audio, or I need access this way, it needs to be in the library, or these different things. And so first getting a read on what can I read, and then how do I get it? The how do I get it is actually a very thorny problem, because someone, it just scrolled by, someone was just talking about the publishers and who you have relationships with. And I saw a video not too long ago that was about Bethany's point of trying to support creators, and how it's often like a tiny amount that you're giving to the creator, and really the structural change that's needed to make that more equitable is like a whole nother piece of the pie. So don't feel like it's all your responsibility, you know, like it's one piece to talk about the book and get people excited and get people connected to the reading aspect, but there's a whole nother structural change, like diversification of the industry and all those other pieces.
Yeah. There was a comment earlier, I kind of lost it here, but from Adora, I think, saying that they wish that more things for the community were focused on older books, or books that were more accessible to get from the library. And I think that's interesting to talk about. I know the main thing that I kind of run is I do a monthly Patreon book club. And I know for that, they vote on it. And I usually try to include mostly backlist titles, and I'll throw in a few new ones. And sometimes they vote on the new ones, but like I try to be aware of that if I'm doing anything for other people, and try to make sure it's something that I think is going to be more widely accessible, so they don't have to go out and like buy a brand new book every month, you know, or wait forever for something.
Yeah. And I actually don't read a lot of front list. I read probably like 15%, maybe 20% front list, and majority I read backlist. And that's also another reason why I'm able to get so much of what I read from the library, because I'm reading things that are older.
Mm-hmm. I think the issue of accessibility with readathons is something that I didn't really think about until recently, because I read, I lead a couple of readathons throughout the year. I have 2 month-long readathons, and then a couple that, you know, repeat here and there. And only recently was it, you know, brought to my attention that like some people can't access these, you know, group books and things. So the readathon I'm currently hosting, we usually have like a short story book, and then everybody has one short story. But my co-host brought up the point that maybe we should also have a sort of option online that they can get to for free. And even within those options, one of them has audio too. So like they were so awesome about, you know, giving these suggestions. So that's one way to be inclusive when it comes to like readathons and read-alongs, is, you know, either having something that's widely accessible, or having something like an alternative to certain prompts and things that you can access online for free. So.
Yeah.
That for me has been a big reason why I don't participate in readathons anymore, because a lot of the times the group book is a brand new book that you can only get in hardcover, and sometimes that's not always feasible for me. You know, I mean, as many books as I have, and as much as I like to talk about being, you know, in a fortunate position to be able to buy books, you know, hardcover books are expensive. And, you know, like I stated earlier in our conversation, right now, a lot of retail outlets that normally offer coupons or additional discounts for those new releases aren't doing that. And so I actually backed away from readathons because I just couldn't afford to play the game. You know, you have to consume these books in such a quick manner, because you're usually only given maybe like 2 weeks notice that a readathon is coming up. Sometimes you get a little bit more time, but you have to order these things. And then, you know, with the COVID situation and being stuck at home, a lot of the times you have now a delay with the mail. So there's a lot of, you know, factors that come into play with that. And I think that that's a great idea that your co-host came up with, because you want to have more people have the option to have accessibility to things and to have more options. I know that a lot of the prompts that are with readathons are, you know, you can kind of just pick whatever falls into that category, but the group book is typically always a new release, which is cool. I mean, I understand the point behind that, but it's hard for some people, and it's hard for me sometimes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have a question I like to ask people that's actually pertinent to this. So when I talk to people in the book selling environment, I love finding out what their percentage of books that they have in their house is of read to unread, because I thought I was kind of like normal when I started thinking about this. And then I asked my sister, and hers was the exact opposite of mine. And I was like, what? Why? So I'd just be interested to know, because that kind of deals with when you bring stuff in, how you process them, whether you go for the new because it's the new thing, or whether you are like methodical and try to go through an order.
That's interesting. So like for readathons, I usually try to pull stuff off my bookshelf. Like I try that I have on my TBR already that will fit the prompts or things I can get access to through my library. I don't usually go out and buy something for a readathon, but it seems like a lot of people do. But I also have a lot of unread books. But for me, my percentages are weird. I probably have more. It's probably more unread than read. Not by a ton, but by somewhat. But also I unhaul many of the books I read. Like I'm very picky about what I keep. So like if it's not something I love or something that I have like attachment to for one reason or another, this is the thing I think that's interesting with this conversation versus, for instance, like in the beauty industry, is that books have resale value. Makeup doesn't. And so like I can sell books back to my indie bookstore for credit, to use the credit to get new books. Or like donate them to the library, or donate them to like a nonprofit bookstore in my community, or send them to other people. And so I do a lot of that. I don't actually keep I'm pretty picky about what I keep that I read. And so that's where my percentages end up falling, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I actually have more unread books than read books, but honestly, partially that's because like literally over 2 years ago, I went to a library book sale where you could take like a whole paper bag full of books for like $2 or 10. I don't remember how much. It was insanely cheap. And I brought home a ton of books, and I've slowly been like chipping away at them, but I still have those books unread. So I do have a lot that are unread, but also that brings me back to something Bethany was saying about the resale value. So actually, the majority of the books that I own that are unread are on my ebook. Like I buy a lot of Kindle books when they are less than $3. It is so easy for me to just buy them because I'm like, oh, I was interested in that. I'll read it someday. It's like $2. Let me buy that. And so I have so many unread Kindle books. But those don't have resale value, right? It's only when you buy physical books that do. And the majority of the money I spend on books, because I'm not a collector, is more on the ebook and audiobook side, which doesn't have resale value. So
right. Intellectual property.
Yeah.
I'm probably, it feels like the same. I'm about 60 unread, 40 read, I think, at this point. And some of the people in the comments are about the same. Yeah. Interesting.
I honestly don't know, but with mine, but because it's a shared collection, it's kind of hard to tell because there's some books that I really didn't pick out, and then there's some books that we kind of share that one of us might claim. He reads a lot. Weirdly, he reads a lot more than I do, but I have a lot more books than he does. So he also rereads more than I do. So I just like to have things so I can like remember, because I feel like if I don't have it in front of me, I'm going to forget that I read it. So it's just, for me, I also like to, have it for that reason. But
oh, I can't remember anything that I've read unless I look at my Goodreads.
Yeah, I know, the record. The official record.
Goodreads is so helpful, and my spreadsheet. Cami, did you comment on this?
I was thinking while you guys were all talking, I don't know that I have a percentage for you because I'm a bona fide book collector. I'll admit it. My fiance will call me a book hoarder, but that's a conversation for another day. That said, I tend to buy more books because I know I'm kind of fitting them in where I'm missing gaps in collections. And my mother said that this is a problem that I have OCD, and I have always been very much aware of that, but I didn't realize that there's a part of OCD that you actually have a desire to finish collections. And I apparently have had this since a very young age, and it's kind of scary to realize that at almost 40, but I continue this. And now that I'm cognizant of it, I can't say that I fixed the problem, but I now know that it is a attribute to my OCD.
Actually,
a much larger ratio. Oh, go ahead. No, that's okay.
Sorry, I was just going to say that hoarding also has a similar impact on your brain as OCD. So sometimes they can be very similar, the way that your brain processes hoarding and OCD. Not saying that everybody has both, but I wanted to throw that out there.
Well, see, I have hoarding tendencies. Not like I keep trash or something. I don't want to scare people at home like, oh my God, she's probably showing us the corner of her house that's actually clean and everything else she has to like walk on mountains around. No, I don't hoard. I want to be very clear about that. But I am very cognizant that because of my collecting habit that I could easily be a hoarder tomorrow. And so that for me, now knowing that part of the OCD has helped me to kind of scale back and ask myself, am I collecting this because I genuinely want it, or am I collecting it simply for the act of collecting and completing something? And I think that, because you had, I think, touched on that earlier, Kate, where you had said that you get to a point with your, your situation with bipolarism where you buy stuff to the point where you kind of get sick or nauseous, I'm not sure how you worded it exactly. Yeah. But earlier in the year, I actually got physically ill from purchasing stuff, not just necessarily books, just stuff in general. And I told myself, okay, if you're feeling this way, you really need to stop. And so I do think I have moments with myself, knowing my condition, that I just kind of back away and say, okay, you need to answer these questions. And I can easily stop, though. I think I'm at a point now in my collecting that I'm comfortable where I'm at, and if I see something that I absolutely have to have, then fine, I'll grab it. But I don't have such a need now to fill those gaps anymore because I have so much stuff. I mean, you guys see this portion of my room. This is just one of many collections that I have. This is just Disney, so that's scary. I don't want to show you my library. I actually have a she shed. That is my library. I kid you not. I'll show you guys on YouTube someday.
And I think one thing people don't talk about, like my husband reminds me of this all the time, even though like we don't buy a lot of books, but books are actually pretty good bang for your buck when it comes to entertainment. Like think about how much you pay to go to the movies or rent a movie or even like play video games. Granted, video games take a lot of hours, but if you think about how much entertainment you get time-wise per dollar, it's actually pretty cheap entertainment, especially if you get physical copies that you can resell, like Bethany was saying, it's actually pretty good bang for your buck.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's something we're thinking about is like, at least for people who do have some level of disposable income, they're spending it on something. And it's like, I spend most of that on books and coffee.
Right? I mean, there's that great quote about whenever I have a little money, I buy books. And if there's anything left over, I buy clothes and food. You know that? I can't remember who said it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I think there's something to be aware of is that, I think age does play a big role. And there were some people in the comments commenting on this as well, that like, there are booktubers in their teens. There's booktubers like in their early 20s into 30s into older, and like your age, your job, your income, your place in life, like all of that really affects things. And I think to like assume that everything is moving for everybody, is a problem. And I think that's worth talking about and unpacking, that like your approach might be really different. I do think, and I think a couple people also were talking about like where you shop, and this I think is complicated. I'm trying to do more of supporting indie bookstores and less purchasing from Amazon because they best business practices, but also like it requires privilege to be able to do that because some people can't afford to because, and so then either used bookstores or Amazon become the option, and like shaming people because they aren't able to do that is a problem. So like, it's like, I think it is important to talk about these issues and talk about like, but it's complicated.
Yeah. And I think it's also in some ways important to recognize that when it comes to like the ebook and audiobook world, Amazon definitely has like a hold on it that is hard to let go. Like I would love to, I have a Kindle, and because of that, I have to buy my ebooks from Amazon if I'm going to buy them. And audiobooks, I try not to buy audiobooks because they're really expensive. But sometimes I hate the fact that Audible exclusives exist because it forces my hand. Because most of the time I get my audiobooks from the library because they're expensive.
Yeah.
But if something's an Audible exclusive, I have to get it from Audible. So that's frustrating.
Mm-hmm. And on the subject of Amazon, there's also some authors that can only publish because they were able to, publish through that, I don't know what it's called, the program on Amazon. And I know there's been some authors that that's the only way I could really get a hold of their books because of where they live or where I live, things like that.
Yeah, especially a lot of like indie pub authors, like if they're self-pubbed,
that's the only place you can get
the
it.
most on Amazon.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can also go through Ingram now and get the same distribution. Just a public service announcement. Yeah, I think you get, and this is this is a budgeting sort of tactic for me, is that I sort of have a priority list of, okay, this is the best ideal way I could get this thing, right? Go to an indie bookstore and, talk to the person who I know personally and buy the book there and have a chat. But if that's not possible because of distance or cost or timing, for all the reasons that you guys have brought up, then you go to the next one. What's the next one? Well, I go to the library. Or if it's a new book, okay, I go through this Smashwords, or I go through, you have all your own individual values that dictate your own hierarchy of decisions, and that's totally okay. I think that's just something you have to sort out based on your values, and so that's what comes out through this discussion.
And I think one of the things that has gravitated me to a lot of creators is the fact, especially like the ones here that we're having the discussion with, is that I find that you all disseminate information that is very beneficial to the masses, and that you find creative ways for people to consume more but not spend more. You find ways of being all inclusive regardless of people's economic status or their ability to buy or not buy books. And I know I've told Bethany this, I sing her praises all the time because I really appreciate the way that she reads. I can never read at the speed and the rate that she reads, but I really admire how she always has a physical book going, an audio book and an ebook, and I've picked up that tactic, and that's helped me to increase my reading. Amazon in and of itself, kind of just piggybacking off of what Kate just said, is a beast all its own. We could literally have a conversation about Amazon, but unfortunately, when we dig in and we learn about Amazon, they own a lot of these book companies that we try and offset our purchases from. And we've all kind of learned that through the back door that, I'd rather buy from, the book, whatever, and then realize, wait, that's owned by Amazon. Goodreads is owned by Amazon, So when you realize what kind of pull and influence that they have. Exactly. So, you can't escape the beast that is Amazon. And, touching on what Jade was saying with indie authors, I support a mass amount of indie authors. Horror is very much comprised of horror is very much comprised of indie. And oftentimes I will reach out to the author with that notion, trying to support their company, but a lot of the companies go through Amazon. So unless they're directly sending material to me or offer to do so, Amazon is my only way of purchasing these books. So I think that having the conversations often and just kind of making it something we remind ourselves as creators to have these conversations maybe more frequently, with the understanding that our community and our audience is forever changing, and that we're always going to have new faces, and we're always going to have new people interested in our channels, and helping people learn how to, just read and consume differently or think outside the box. So often I've thought about, talking to people about ways to get free books. I've discovered ways to get free books like you wouldn't believe, but it's just, okay, do you read ebooks? If you do, well, then I've got 5 different places right now that you can go to get free ebooks. Oh, yeah. Now, of course, they're not always going to be the latest and greatest, but creating that kind of content, I think, is so helpful to our community. And I think that a lot of people would be appreciative, and maybe we wouldn't get to a point like this where we feel like we're being attacked or we have to defend our platform or our space, and say why we do what we do. But it's also, helpful that people ask us questions. If you think that, our book hauls are ridiculous, DM me, let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation. There's nothing wrong with asking questions, but again, don't attack people. I personally haven't done a book haul in a long time, and I made that executive decision to not do book hauls on my channel anymore, but I've found different ways of integrating the material that I'm reading and talking about. And I think book reviews are very important too, but I think people are afraid to talk about book reviews because how long they take to get views. And I think maybe as a community, we shouldn't be so concerned. Oh, did I cut off?
A little bit, at least for me. I don't know.
I'm sorry.
Maybe
it might be these ridiculous headphones.
Okay. I think I want to talk.
But no, I mean, that's basically it.
Okay. Yeah. I think this is an interesting comment, and I think worth talking about, of like how we determine the format that we buy in. And like, so I don't know if you guys want to comment on this. I know ebooks, there are a lot of great ways to get ebooks, and there was a question in here. One thing is, if you sign up for the Tor.com newsletter every month, they have a free ebook, and they're good ones often. There are other ways to get free or very inexpensive ebooks. For me, almost all of my e-reading is ebooks from NetGalley, and I don't prefer e-reading. So like I always have one going, and usually I reserve that for like NetGalley stuff, unless it's like for a project where the only way I can get it is through ebook format, like some romance thing or something. So typically if I'm buying a book, it's going to be physical or it's going to be on audio. But like, if I don't like an audiobook, I'll return it to get the credit back to spend on something. Oh, do, by the way, on Audible.
We'll offer that service. Why not?
If I don't love
stopped
it,
letting me do that.
It, like all you have to do is email them, and they will still do
Really? They keep trying to get me to call them, and I'm like, no.
Yep. Oh yeah. You can email them, and especially since COVID, they made it easier. They made it easier since COVID because of like decreased staff.
Yeah.
So, one good thing to come out of COVID.
No, I can't, personally, I can't really read ebooks for some reason. As much time as I spend online, I still can't. I can't absorb information from a screen as much. I need it tactile, or I can listen to audiobooks because it's like storytelling. But even then, I kind of go between audio and physical. But even if I'm listening to something, I like to have the physical copy, though. Like, I don't usually just listen unless I have access to the physical as well, because sometimes I want to go and I'd like to reference things, and especially if I like to quote, or if I want to go back and see how someone's name is spelled because I can't quite tell how it's pronounced, or something like that. So, yeah.
Yeah. I used to kind of like what Bethany does, have a book in like each format. Mm-hmm. But I've actually more recently enjoyed having the same book in multiple formats. And that way, because what dictates what format I'm reading tends to just be like what I'm doing. Do I have time to sit on the couch and actually like read? Then I'll do physically. Same. I always read from my Kindle when I'm going to bed. That's how I fall asleep. And if I'm like walking around doing stuff, I'm listening to an audiobook. And I always like to have, like you were saying, Kate, an audio or a physical copy, whether it's ebook or physical, of whatever I'm listening to, in case I like miss something or just want to like skim read what I just listened to make sure that like I fully understood what I was listening to. I mean, I honestly think that if publishers offered all three formats for a discounted price, I'd be buying a lot more books, because I like having books in multiple formats when I'm reading them, which is kind of like something that I don't hear very often, but I really enjoy reading that way.
Mm-hmm. Do you you get that from WhisperSync, or is that like 3 generations ago? Is that what you're using for that, or I don't know?
Yeah,
How do you?
Sometimes the WhisperSync will work, but it doesn't always work. Like if I have the audiobook from the library, or even like the audiobook and the ebook from the library, they won't sync up. So I have to do a little bit of my own work to like keep track of where I am and things like that. And I often will sit down with a physical copy and read along with the audiobook. I'm able to listen at a faster speed if I read along. And then what I also find is, I have dogs, so I can be listening and reading along, and then they'll do something distracting. I look up, and the audiobook is still going, and so I don't like stop reading to be distracted, and then I can just like look back and catch up to where I was. So I actually find I read faster when I read along with the audiobook.
Interesting. It's kind of like you're running along, and then you've got like a little flying device to like get you further when your feet leave. Like you keep going at different speeds, you're still going in the same direction.
I picked up from you, Jade. I think you were the first person I heard talk about that, and now I'll do it sometimes too. And yeah, especially if a book is like dragging, if it's really action heavy, and I just want to like get through some of those scenes, I'll do the same thing. And I can listen at like 3 times speed if I'm reading along at the same time.
I can barely listen at 2 times speed.
Oh my God.
This is part of how I read so quick. I can listen. My husband like how to understand what maybe
I
like
can't deal with the
Smash
slow
Mouth when I was a teenager.
I can't even Kate.
We've gone on like a trip before, and he's like, I'm gonna listen to my audiobook. And I'm like, okay, that would be so awesome if you listened to at a faster speed, but he'd be listening at 1 time speed, and I'm so used to listening quickly that we'll be driving and it sounds like and I'm just like, this is actual torture.
I can't listen to audiobooks at normal speed, but I have a hard time speeding up podcasts. Like I can speed them up a little bit, but not nearly as much as an audiobook. And I don't know why. I think maybe just like when people talk, they talk faster than audiobook narrators read, but it's like for some reason.
It's also the variation, right? So if you find that a book's narrator has a faster voice, you can go, okay, 1.5, but you can't do that with podcasts because they're slowing down and then they're speeding up when they get excited. So you can't. Yeah, that's funny.
Also, like
I hate it when I find narrators
that
do
too.
That.
Yeah, Kate, I
like
agree.
I found like I was listening to one where like they'll do a different accent, like where one character they'll speed up how they talk. An audiobook. I was listening to this and I'm like, stop.
Actors, they gotta differentiate. It's really hard to
I know.
Head. I imagine that's why they do it.
It's also just like the narrator's like bass voice. Like I tried to listen to Black Leopard Red Wolf by Marlon James, and the audiobook narrator, I love his voice. He has this really intense like storyteller voice, but because usually when I'm listening, I'll listen in the car a lot. I can't process the way he speaks for some reason. Like if I turn it up too loud, it like gets way too loud. If I turn it down too low, I can't understand what he's saying. So like certain audio narrators can make it difficult, and so then you have to kind of have the physical. But Jade in the chat made a really good point about Kindle has like a dyslexia friendly font now. I think she said Kindle, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, I saw this. I saw someone talking about it.
V Diggs.
What is that?
Look, I can't concentrate on audiobooks at slow speeds. Like I get so distracted. The only way I can that's part of why I speed it up is because I get distracted at slower speeds and I can't follow the story.
I think part of the reason that the guy that narrated David Diggs, like the book's based off one of his songs from the older group that he's in, and he's a speed rapper, so he probably called out for that reason. He's a speed, so he does really, really, really fast. So that might be part of it.
Yeah, that's fair.
And it's funny because Bethany said that she got the idea from Jade about doing the audio and the physical, and I got it from you, Bethany. So now I'm learning all your secrets, where you get them from. But for me, since I gave the worst introduction of all of us as to who we are and what we do, I have a very physically intensive job. I am a horse boarder, and so a good majority of my days are spent outside, and I need both my hands to chuck chuck hay and chuck horse poop and all of this fun stuff. And so audiobooks have saved my life. They have been so helpful. But when I'm in the house and I'm able to listen to them, I will have a physical book in my hand, because then I can listen to it at a faster speed and follow along. And it is just a godsend. It really does help to increase and keep up with things, you know, because as you kind of immerse yourself in the community, you get involved in things where you need to finish books on a certain date or by a certain time. And if I didn't have that accessibility, I would never get things done. And I just remember for a long time being so shamed about telling people that I was doing that, because audiobooks also get shamed in our community from time to time. People saying, that's not really reading, you know, you're being told a story, it's not the same thing. And it became very important for me to let my audience know that I was doing both the physical and the audio at the same time, in hopes that it would kind of spark something in someone who was very negative about audiobooks to say, hey, it's okay, you know, audio is reading too. And I think that we need to be a little bit more empathetic to the fact that not everyone can physically read a book. You know, there are debilitating things that prevent people from being able to read, either for lengthy periods of time or because of vision impairment, and audio is a godsend to them too. So we just have to word things differently sometimes, and just remember that although we might have had a thought at a moment and it seems right and it seems like it's kind of cut and paste and cookie cutter for the whole community, we're all very different, and we all have very different walks of life, and we're all going through something, and we might not talk about it publicly. You know, there's a lot of things that I've gone through in the last few months, you know, and I'll admit it here. Just last month, I had a stroke, you know, and that for me changed the way that I read. For a period of time, I had horrible migraines and I couldn't do ebooks, and I was so apologetic to authors that had sent me ebooks, and I'm just like, I'm sorry, please bear with me. I'm trying to get through this new style of, you know, trying to be able to read. And I'm still not 100%. I'm still trying to get back to my normal, and I'm coming back. But it's just, we just need to not assume that we're all in the same place when it comes to consuming the books that we love so much. You know, there's so many different ways to enjoy a book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, I think that's actually a good sort of segue to one of the other things I have on our list of things to talk about is how, if it has book buying been different during COVID, for a variety of reasons. And, you know, I see some people saying they're buying more because they have less access to libraries as stress relief, you know, or not being able to buy as much because of lower income. You know, like there's a lot of, Cami, a lot of people are talking here. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Seriously. I think it's true though. Like there is a lot of stuff there, you know, like we share part of our lives as creators, right? Like we share parts of it, but like there's a lot of stuff that happens that we don't necessarily talk about or don't talk about while it's happening. And so I do think that that's important to recognize for sure. And especially with COVID, like how, if anything has changed. I know for me, there was definitely a period of time where I feel like I was, I normally would to support authors of color, to support Black-owned bookstores. And I mean, I'm still continuing to do that, but I think it like really ramped up with everything that was going on in the beginning of June. And I think part of it was just like the awareness of that. And also like following and knowing so many authors of color now too, like in the community, and seeing that and being like, well, yeah, like I want to financially support them. I want to like share their books on my channel and like get other people to read them. And I think that's important. And you know, a related thing is I even am trying to be more aware of like, what am I requesting on NetGalley and like, where are my percentages falling too? I don't know, like those are things to think about if you're a reviewer and you can't like financially buy a lot of books by authors of color. Maybe you can request to review them, but just then be another conversation of like, be aware of how you're reviewing them.
Your percentage is what
I couldn't understand because this character was not like me, therefore I didn't like it. That's not how to review them, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's really good. I just saw your percentages and your pie charts of one of your, I think, wrap-ups, and I thought that was it was original to me. So I don't know if everyone's doing that, but yours was the first I was exposed to. I thought that was really great.
A few other people do it, I think, but yeah, I've been trying to be more regularly open about it.
For me,
I think for
book buying.
COVID, sorry. I was just going to say, I think for COVID, the changes initially were like in the beginning when we made the realization that we were on lockdown pretty much and that we couldn't go to the bookstores that we love to go to, or we couldn't go thrifting or things like that. We had to get creative, and we had to say, if we're going to continue to be creators and we're going to continue content, we have to find other ways of doing this. For a lot of people, it was just simply using what they had. It was like, okay, you know what? I don't have a lot of options, so I'm just going to finally get to those books that I haven't touched, or I'm going to, see other ways of being creative, maybe make other content. You saw a lot of creators that normally would do one type of thing like Booktube, try crafting or try FlossTube, or, just try to do other things around their house. And I think that another part of that for a lot of us was an escape. We were trying to deal with what we were going through. I think that so many of our lives were impacted in so many different ways, and then it just seemed like that was the tip of the iceberg, and then we had all of these things just start to unravel. I think if 2020 has taught me personally anything, it's that things are starting to manifest. People are showing their true colors. We're starting to see, just how ugly the world can be. And I think that we are integrating that into our platforms, and people are seeing us reading more diversely or being more vocal about reading diversely, and the importance of integrating diversity in the community and how we should have been doing it all along. And just, there's just so many aspects, and we could take this in 1,000 different directions. So I certainly don't want to get off topic here, but I think that it's so important that people are not afraid to use their voices now. And I think that COVID allotted for us to kind of just find our true selves and work with what we had, and just kind of create this new environment that said, hey, this is me, this is, what I'm offering. If you don't like it, there's a million other creators that you can go and support. And in addition to, I would like to highlight and talk about, certain creators that I love that I don't think anybody's paying attention to. But I think also our reading kind of faltered for a lot of us. We just kind of stopped reading for a while because we didn't know how to read. Our minds were so cluttered with everything going on, and it just seemed like every day we were taking in something else, something from a news environment or from a friend or personally, or, and it just became so overwhelming. And I honestly think that for me, that's what happened, is I just became so overwhelmed in my own space that I just was like, okay. And my body just said, no more, overload, danger, Will Robinson, So, we just have to be, self-care is so important, and we can't forget that.
Go ahead, Kate. Did you have your hand up? No?
Did I? I may have. Because I did have something to say.
Might have been waiting to buy. I don't know.
That is also possible. I don't remember. But when it comes to spending, I think I spent less when we were more on lockdown. But I also live in a southern state where everyone's like, who's going to enforce that? And it's like the people that are supposed to be enforcing things are doing that. But that aside, that's a whole other thing. I definitely spent less because, I didn't want to go out, and even though things were open, I didn't want to go out and touch things. I didn't want to be around people, and I don't really buy that much online. Because a lot of the impulse for me comes from being able to see and be like, ooh, that's nice. It's like, ooh, piece of candy. And just picking things up that way. Usually when I buy online, it's something that I've been wanting and I couldn't find elsewhere, or it's for something specific, or it's like a new release, which I read a lot of backlist. I do read some new releases, but it's usually for something specific. So I read a lot, or I purchased a lot less. I also read a lot less, but I did purchase a lot less once, COVID started. Yeah.
I was just going to say, so when in March, so I was unemployed, and I was making very specific choices about the restaurants that I go to regularly and trying to like make sure I go to them once a week, and the bookstore and whatnot. So like putting all my energy into, okay, I'm going to do like my little haul for my local Portland, whatever. And then as it went on, and then I wasn't getting stimulus checks anymore. I was like, okay, where's the one book I'm going to order that's from an author of color that I see featured in a video? So it was really like taking my little smaller piece of influence and doing with it what I could. I actually have read not as much as Bethany, but plenty. I'm not as disciplined, so I'm on book 100, but I'm reading like 8 books at a time. So I'm like, I don't know what 100 will be. Whatever gets finished next. So I've found that when I have days that I'm not productive, not able to concentrate, feeling that whole clutter feeling Cami was talking about, it's like, oh, there went the thought. Never mind.
Okay.
That speaks to the point, though.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, for me, during the pandemic, I feel like, okay, so I definitely had a period where I wanted to go book shopping, but I couldn't. And so what I ended up doing is going to NetGalley, and I went on a requesting rampage, and I ended up with like 8 advanced reader copies, which is not typically my thing. Like I said, I usually don't read a ton of new, like frontless books. But I just had this itch that I really wanted to acquire new books, and I didn't want to spend money particularly. So I went about other ways of getting free books or cheap books. I definitely purchased a lot of cheap Kindle books over the last few months that I probably wouldn't have if the pandemic wasn't happening. Just like my bar for buying has been a little lower than usual because of the pandemic, I think. A little bit of what's the term when you like go shopping just to make you happy? Like
window
Retail
shopping?
therapy.
Retail therapy.
Retail therapy, yeah.
Yeah, I've been doing some of that.
I remember what my thought was. It was about achievement. So when I have one of those days where you can't focus or concentrate, reading a book and like finishing a book that day feels like an achievement. And so that's been like a go-to when I'm feeling like I can't get anything done, honestly.
That's very true.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of conversation happening in the comments that I think is important, of like concern about support for Black authors and authors of color dying down. And I think it's a mixed bag. Like, I think that like Beth has this example. I think for me, like I've always tried to read diversely. I've always read like other, at least not always, but like in the last, I've made it an active goal for the last couple of years since I realized how undiverse my reading was after joining Booktube. And ever since then, like that's something I've worked at just doing regularly, and that's only increased for me. And now I'm trying to like, this is part of why, Margaret, I recently started putting my stats on. I always talk about them at the end of the year, but I've recently started talking about them in my monthly wrap-ups. And that's part of why is like normalizing, just being aware of like, what are you reading? Who are you picking up? Like, it doesn't all have to be that, but like, and it can be in the genres that you like, but trying to just make that a normal part of your reading and part of like habits of what you're including. And I think the way that this changes is just by everybody or a lot of people just doing that and talking about it in the wrap-ups and making it seem normal. And I think, I don't know, it's interesting too, like being a white booktuber, I think a lot also about, because I now read a lot of romance, and honestly, like just because they are, like a lot of my favorite romance authors are Black authors who I think write great stuff with important themes. But like there was, I know when I, not so long ago, and maybe even some places now, there could be a stigma around like, well, why are you reading that? It's got Black people on the cover. That's not for you. And like, I think Booktube has been part of, and hopefully other places too, stigmatizing that like, no, romance is universal. Like, I don't know, like these things that I try to think about.
It's good to think about.
Something that I want to speak. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Margaret.
I was
I'll
just
go
gonna
back to
say,
it.
I was just going to say that it's the extra step that the reader doesn't usually think to do of knowing what the author looks like. Because you have a name on a page, sometimes you'll have a picture, but often like you won't know what's their background, what's their race, what's their, you know, their stance on issues. And maybe it'll come out later as a big like reveal and you're like, oh shit. But you know, it's good to know ahead of time and try to see that. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that when our buying decreases, it's not like we don't cut out the authors that, you know, need our support and that deserve our support. And I definitely have seen a lot of friends on, you know, on the platform talk about how their support has gone down. A lot of Black creators on the platform, not just authors and things like that, but also creators. They've seen their support go down, and they've only seen, you know, that surge in support when something terrible happens. And so I think it's important to kind of incorporate that into, you know, every day, because we shouldn't be going back to what, you know, was before. This should be our new normal, is that we're giving this support, because I mean, honestly, we're late to the game in this. We need to have been doing this for a long time. But
You have made a point though right now, Bethany, that really struck a chord with me, because this is a conversation that I got into with someone on Bookstagram recently, and that was the phrase that I hear so often now that more people are making diversification an importance in their reading habits, is that the reviews often lead with, and this isn't in all cases, but the people that fall in this category will say, this book just wasn't for me, and not for the reasons that it sounds like it might have not been material that they're interested in, like say maybe like a sci-fi category or a romance category, just simply because it's a person of color as the main character or as the scene of the story. And that really just chaps my hide, because we shouldn't be talking like that. If we're going to have a communication and I guess a forum for opening up, diversifying our reading, just because you are of a certain ethnicity or a certain color, or you identify, or you know, you project yourself as, or passing, or you know, whatever the term is that you want to use, and you don't relate to the story in that regard, that's not a reason to say this story wasn't for me. That just bothers me to no belief. And the argument that, I don't want to call it an argument because I adore the person that I talked to about this, but the whole conversation stemmed from the fact that as creators, if we get, say, books from the publishers that aren't necessarily for us, whatever they meant by that, I'm just guessing that they meant because our skin tones don't match or our ethnicities aren't the same, that we should be pushing those publishers to identify with the audience that they're intended for. And that's very dangerous ground, because although I strongly believe in own voices, again, we have to watch how we word things in the community, because there's a difference between an own voices platform and reading diversely and appreciating what you read, because you can read from any background, from any world, from, I mean, isn't that the point of books? Isn't that what we do? We're traveling, we're meeting people, we're meeting countries, we're meeting, you know, different cultures, and that's what makes reading rich. I mean, I've been taking adventures since I was a child, and I don't want someone to tell me I can't read something because my skin tone doesn't match the author's. When I pick up a book, I don't pick it up because the author is a certain ethnicity or the tone of the story is going to lead me in a direction. I pick up a story because it's an immediate cover buy or it's a recommendation from a friend. And if it just so happens that the author is a person of color or from a diverse background, that's a bonus. And we should be highlighting that and appreciating that and respecting that. And I also want to speak to the community as a whole, where you guys are saying that, you know, there's a push, or there was a push in the beginning when, as it was mentioned in the comments, with the social injustice situation that occurred, where it pushed a lot of people to start subscribing to creators of color. And then now we're noticing a trend. So many creators of color said this: please don't subscribe to me just because I'm this or that, or because I fit or check this box for you. Please subscribe to my channel because you actually care about what I'm talking about, because you're going to sit through my videos, because we're harming creators by doing that, by not watching their videos. And then, sorry, last point, and I promise I'll be quiet, but another thing that bothered me in the comments a little bit was this talk of normal. What is normal? And whoever gave it a definition. There's so much talk about, I just want to get back to normal. Maybe we're not supposed to get back to normal. Maybe all of this happened because we're supposed to shake things up. Maybe we're supposed to take the blinders off. Maybe my definition of normal and your definition of normal isn't the same thing. So stop, just like I'm telling you not to label me or not to put me in a box or not to tell me because I read this, I'm that, or because I talk about this, I'm that. Maybe it's okay to be a multitude of things, and maybe it's okay to be weird, because I've been weird my whole life. I'm not normal. I'm like the opposite of normal, and I'm okay with that. Okay, I'm done.
Totally agree. Actually,
I mean, how many of us on BookTube are normal? So, no, you're good.
I was listening.
What?
I was listening to your conversation about Native Voices books on Thor Wants Another Letters channel, and I was thinking a little bit of the same thing about been trying to read more books outside my comfort zone or outside my normal avenue of how I get them. And if I do come across a book where I'm like, I'm not getting the jokes, I'm not getting the theme, there's more in there that I don't know how to harvest kind of feeling, you know, like you're trying to get more into it, but you don't have the access to that culture and what like advice they could give. And someone on her channel gave really good advice. It was to read it and then to go to like the virtual book club that some of the booktubers are hosting, get their sort of download about the reviews and be like, oh, okay, processing this, processing that, thinking it over, and then read it again. And I was like, that's brilliant. So I just wanted to pass on that tip in terms of diversifying and enjoying, and then we can go back to the not for me and representation and relatability conversation.
Yeah, like reading own voices reviews of a book and thinking about it. Yeah.
I do think that if given a review copy, I typically don't request review copies of a book that doesn't represent me in a way that is significant when it represents someone else, and because I don't want to take that away from somebody when it comes to a review copy. But when it comes to after the book is published, I'm also that's great, I want to pick it up. But I typically don't really request arcs in general, though I just kind of do backlist. However, I have been in a situation where I've come across books that have a specific type of representation in them. Like I found an arc somewhere in a store that they're like, we were given all these arcs. And I was like, is that Mexican Gothic? Why is it here? And so like I snatched that one up and I sent it to somebody,
Nice.
And usually when that happens, I'll get it and I'll send it to somebody who I know can speak more authentically to the representation. But that doesn't prevent me from actually reading it once it comes out. It just, before it comes out, I would love for reviewers that can speak to the representation to be able to have that first shot of actually, saying, hey, this is good or bad representation. So.
Yeah.
I have one more point to make. Sorry. I always have something to say, I guess. The only reason I speak to this is because I do want to make one more point. I guess I'm just kind of coming out to the world tonight and saying a lot of things that have been on my chest and on my mind for a while. But I think we also need to stop assuming that the person that we're watching is of a certain ethnicity, race, or background, because I was publicly shamed at a book convention a year ago because I am half Spanish, and I don't represent that in any way. And this gets me emotional because I was made to feel really horrible at this convention because I said it in a setting that I thought I was safe. I don't talk about my ethnicity at all on my channel, and this goes back to what I said earlier. We don't know everything about everyone when we create a channel, and because of the fact that I never made that vocal, or because I've never represented it in such a way, I was made to feel ashamed for mentioning it in a place where that was brought to topic. And it hurt me so bad because I wasn't trying to fit in. I wasn't trying to be like, oh, I'm this or that. I was just trying to say, I can relate. And it's okay to be something and not represent it, because not everybody is comfortable representing something because it doesn't make sense and it doesn't always have to be said. And I think that when people are brave enough to say that they are whatever they're proud to be or whatever is in their heart, then people shouldn't shame people for being part of a community, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's just my take.
Yep.
And I absolutely agree with that.
Well, and I think
I'm gonna link something in the chat. So
yeah, no, go for it. Yeah, and I think this relates to all the stuff that's come up recently with Becky Albertalli feeling forced to come out before she was really ready to, because of people like saying, well, why are you like a cishet woman writing queer teen stories? And like, well, maybe she's not actually straight. And I do think that this is something, like this is exactly it, of like, there's a lot that you don't know. Like, you don't know, and I can't tell you too how many creators I've talked to who are biracial, for instance, or of mixed race, who don't talk about it and feel like they can't because they're white passing. And there's a lot of assumptions that get made about people's race and ethnicity and gender identity and sexuality, and like, we just need to not do
Just
that.
not. Yeah, just not. Totally.
Yep.
I think that we're the only ones that really know ourselves completely, so like, if you are represented by a book or not, you don't necessarily have to share it, but I think that, we might know, other people not. I know there's certainly things I can't talk about on my channel safely. So everyone's very different, but I had mentioned it in the chat. Brody actually has a video specifically about that topic, and it's really, really great.
Yeah. Well, and and I think it can be a safety thing. It can also be like a you're not ready to talk about it thing. Like, I don't really much about this on my channel, but just in the last couple months have sort of talked about it on Twitter. Is like, I am in a straight passing monogamous relationship, but I'm not straight, and like, that's something I realized late in life, and like, it took, it wasn't until like years after I realized that I was comfortable actually like talking about it. And that's complicated, like, Anyway, so I think this is like, people need to be more careful because there's so many assumptions that get made.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sorry guys, I didn't mean to get emotional. It's just there's certain things that happen in this community, and I think that oftentimes we just get quiet about things because it just seems like if we make a video about it, we're being dramatic, or we're trying to get our 15 minutes of fame, or we're trying to gain subscribers. And that's something that I was actually asked by a small group of people that were at that convention with me, like, talk about this, let people know about your experience. But I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to be safe about it and not traumatize myself more. I mean, I cried for 3 days at a convention that I spent over $1,000 to be at, to feel like this big, and it was a horrible experience, and it made me never want to go back. But in the same regard, the people that embraced me, and Jade was one of those people, so, let's give Jade some credit here, because she was really one of my saving graces at that convention. And if it wasn't for the small handful of people that embraced me and told me, it's okay, let's just go to Disney World, let's just go do something to get your mind off of this, then I wouldn't have gotten through that weekend, and I wouldn't have felt like my points were valid. I would have felt like everybody that shamed me for saying what I said was right. And we have to stop doing that. We have to stop making people feel uncomfortable, because I think that's why we lose a great amount of really awesome people in this community, because we shame them for saying something that's valid. And don't get me wrong, there's people that should be ousted from this community for being awful and ornery and ugly, and it's great to see that when it happens, when it's deserving. But it's okay to speak your mind, and it's okay to do that, but allow people the space to be able to do that in their own time and in their own comfort zone, because sometimes it might not ever come. And this is the first time I've ever spoken about it out of a private forum, and I won't name names or anything like that. I'm beyond that. But it took me a long time to heal and recover, and there's just a lot of ugliness that happens in a community of people with like-minded views, and we need to be better to each other.
Yeah. So Well, Cami, there's a lot of support for you out here. Yeah. And and I think this is true, is like, I have found amazing friends through the community, as well. Like, I think there is support to be found. It's just, it's a mixed bag sometimes. And, it's an ongoing conversation. So we are just over an hour and a half. I don't know if people have final thoughts, if people in the chat have questions or things they would like us to talk about. We're going to probably try to wrap things up here in the next little bit.
Questions or suggestions, I think, would be really interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true. Book Twitter can be a messy place.
I did have a thought, just something I wanted to bring up, is because this conversation comes up so often. It's a repeating, as all of them are, which comes up every now and then, and it's something that a lot of times we have opinions on that we discuss, but we don't always talk about like the solution, like how do we make this better, how do we fix this. And so I think that would be something interesting to discuss, is just like how do we make this better, so the next time this discussion comes around we can say, hey, we made progress, so
Good point.
I mean, I think for me, the biggest takeaway is that, like, you should respect how other people choose to spend their money, and if it's different from how you choose to spend your money, there's no reason to shame people. Like, I think compared to a lot of booktubers, I don't buy a lot of books, but it's not because I don't want to support authors. It's not because I don't love to read. It's just not how I choose to spend my money, and I shouldn't be made to feel bad about that. And the opposite, which is more what usually happens, is people who do choose to spend their money on books get shamed for it. And I don't think that's fair, because they're spending money on the things that make them happy. And so my bottom line is just respect other people and let them do what they want. It's none of our business. And like Cami and all of us have said, like, we don't know everything that's going on in their lives and where they get their money from, or, if they don't talk about like how they source their books. Maybe a lot of their books are, super cheap and hand-me-downs and things. And it's not that they're spending, we just don't know what's going on. And yeah, so my bottom line is just respect how other people choose to spend their money and choose to acquire books.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like, being, and I already kind of tried to do this, but for others also, just being transparent when you do book hauls, right? Like I know when I'm always very and clear about like, and so, thank you for sending me this. Harlequin sent me these books for Instagram, or like, whatever it is, like being transparent about like, where are the books coming from? And like, why are you buying them? Think about it. And I think just like having these conversations, right? Like keeping conversation open in the community. And I do think in some ways YouTube is a better, in my opinion, better place to have these conversations sometimes than Twitter, just because you can have more full discussions than you can in however many characters, which is can get tricky.
It seems like on Twitter that like an actual valid discussion gets reduced to, oh, they're trying to tell me what to do with my life, and sometimes they might be, but it's also there's so many layers to it. I mean, we've been talking for an hour and a half, and I'm sure we've barely, scraped the surface of what could be discussed in this conversation. There's just so much that goes into it, and there's accessibility, there's classism, there's all kinds of things that can go into it. But I think it would, help for both sides, just kind of having open mind and listening to, when other people talk, and kind of getting an idea of what's going on. Because I think a lot of times we are really quick to jump on a side on Twitter rather than having the discussion. We just want to be like, okay, well, who's right? When in reality, there's layers to it.
And there's no right. It's right for that person, but there's no right for everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that
I think
sorry, I think we happened at the same time. The delay means that we're always off. Anyway, I think the thing that this discussion reflects or gives me to reflect on is that a lot of the reaction or the feelings that I have about the way that it can come off from some booktubers is about guilt and privilege, and that's something I'm still processing, like especially this year, and how I externalize that, or how I, you know, hide away with that and try to do something with it. I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, reading especially Me and White Supremacy, there's like a whole piece about like the guilt is not helping people of color. So what are you going to do to like get around that? And so it's the same thing with the, you know, money and privilege. It's like, think of how you're going to include people in the conversation and be positive about it.
Well, and I think being intentional with your book buying, right? Like, you know, like even if you are buying a lot of books, like be intentional about where you're getting them, what authors you're purchasing, you know, like what you're putting in front of your audience, and like, you know, consider whether it has to just be like all the things that, you know, that are going to easily top the New York Times bestseller list, or versus like debut authors or authors of color, some of whom will, but not all. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't like maybe you want the new Sarah J. Maas, but like maybe you could not just haul that and like Pearl Prince, or you know what I mean? Not that there's anything wrong with having those, but like if that's all the type of thing that you're buying, like like have some balance there. And I don't know, like it's there was something up here that like had me thinking, and now I've like lost it. That's fine if anybody else has.
I do think that some things that might help just moving forward is also just acknowledging that there are different levels, you know, when it comes to book clubs, when it comes to readathons, making sure there are options there, you know, there isn't always a requirement for money to be spent for everyone to be on an even playing ground. And I know it was said that this is a very nuanced discussion. Trust me, I can start just saying I never said any of this if at any point, if we want to make it more like the debates. But no, I do think that would help if we were just more, you know, nuanced to that. And also hyping up when people do library hauls and used book hauls, and you know, encouraging that, because the more it's encouraged, the more people will do it and feel comfortable doing so.
Yeah, definitely. You know, you're probably not missing out on
I think
Twitter,
my final thoughts in all of this my final thoughts in all of this is just the importance of this right here, communication, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's through Bookstagram, whether it's on Facebook, whatever platform that you choose to use. And then obviously, you know, YouTube is our community, but I think that being open to communicate, being willing to have a discussion with people. And I wish more things like this would happen on a more regular basis, because I feel that as Kate had mentioned, you know, these things will continue to resurface. This isn't the last time we're going to hear about, you know, consumerism in the Booktube community. This isn't the last time we're going to have, you know, a difference of opinion. And we could go on. And, you know, just being cognizant that people are coming and going constantly in this community. And, you know, if anybody ever wants to have conversations like this on their channel, where we're encouraging people, you know, other people to join us and have the conversation, because that's also very important, is to get other points of view and other backgrounds and other, you know, other takes on this conversation. The chat has been absolutely amazing. This has been one of the most informative chats, and just the back and forth has just been so helpful. And I cannot thank everyone who's been here enough. But I just hope, that's my ploy to the book community, is that more people will consider doing maybe live segments like this, and, you know, offering an invitation to someone that might be different. You know, I'm strange because I am a horror tuber. That's what I call myself. I read 95% horror all the time. I do read other things, but I don't actually fit in a lot of places in Booktube, but Bethany always finds a place for me to fit, and that's awesome. You know, she'll like message me and be like, hey, you want to be a part of this? And it's like, cool, somebody wants to talk about gross, creepy, weird, goosey things. You know, that's awesome. So I appreciate people like Bethany, because she's really the glue that holds this community together. So I think, you know, just extending the olive branch and being willing to work with people that aren't necessarily like you, that don't necessarily read what you read, you know, so just keeping that platform open. That's my final thought.
Definitely. Everybody pay attention to Ashley, our Booktube librarian. Support your libraries. They get more funding the more you get books out. So I do a lot of audiobooks from my library at least. And
Same.
I'm a Booktube mom. Literally and figuratively, I guess. Thank you, Rachel. John, you should go follow Cami.
There you go.
There was a comment about there being a backlist book club, and I think there are a few backlist book clubs. There's also classic book clubs, which are really easy to find audiobooks where you can actually find some of those on like YouTube. But and also, I mean, I have a Gothic literature book club, which is somewhat backlist, just a little self plug. But there are a lot of backlist book clubs out there.
Nice.
So.
That's awesome. So I remember what I was kind of thinking, because Margaret had mentioned this issue of like guilt, which like that could go multiple ways. But one thing that I do think about is sometimes I feel like there can be some level of that, of like with publishers sending books. I see that with people sometimes. And like, I know for me, like I mean, sometimes I get some stuff that I didn't ask for, but I'm careful about and then like, I don't necessarily feel guilty about it because also like, this is their marketing budget and it's like sort of free labor for them. So I guess part of it is too, and you know, in general, studies show that like, particularly people who grow up as female tend to undervalue their labor.
Oh yeah.
And like that is a thing to like actively push back on, and I like work on pushing back on. And so part of it is like, if you are a reviewer, if you are a content creator and you are doing a service to publishers, to authors, like value your labor, you know?
Totally.
And I think that's like something to consider.
Yeah. It's a
That
hard
was something
road.
I didn't even know anything about, though. The marketing budget that you're talking about, it took me over a year that I was in this community to realize that was a thing. I felt extremely guilty getting a free book from someone or being offered it, even from an author, a publisher. I'm just like, oh my God, I'm stealing from them. That's their work. You know, they work so hard on this. And then they're going to just send it to me and pay for postage. So again, that comes with learning the lingo, learning the business. And I think that's very important in the transparency that we are responsible for. You know, as these content creators, if we're going to be showcasing these books, not only going the mile to say that you received the book at no expense, but you know, explain a little bit more as to maybe, do you work with that publishing company? Is that, you know, something that you highlight? You know, I recently became an influencer for Quirk Books, and that's something I'm very excited about. And I've only announced that on Twitter and on Booktube or on Bookstagram, you know, but that's going to open up a huge platform for me to be talking about a lot of really creepy things in the future. And I'm super excited about that. So, you know, I mean, we need to own the excitement, though. We need to be able to be happy about the opportunities that we're given, and we don't need to feel ashamed for that, because we've worked our butts off, you know, to get where we are, to, you know, get the kind of penetration that we have. And this venture is not a cheap venture, you know. We have to purchase equipment, and, you know, there's a lot that goes into this that we don't talk about. And it's okay to you know, pat yourself on the back every now and then and say, hey, you know what, my hard work paid off and somebody noticed, and that's okay. But, you know, just taking it with grace and humility goes a long way. So, you know, I don't know.
And
I could go on and on about that.
Because, I mean, and I do think the humility is part of it, because I have seen like people where it turns into feeling like they deserve things, or like entitlement, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Like I do think there's like a balance between like valuing your labor but not becoming entitled. And you know, some people don't walk that line very well, and other people do.
Some a better balance.
Yeah. And we have a question, John. Yes, what people are saying, go for it. you know, like people will connect with you as a person. You dive in, you learn as you go. Like the best way to learn is to just do it. Just start posting, and your people will find you, and you will get better as you go. Like I have my first videos up from whatever 3.5 years ago, and they are not good, and the equipment wasn't good, but you know, they've gotten much better.
Yeah.
The learning curve is very steep at the beginning. You'll see it right away, which is actually satisfying because you'll see, oh, wow, look at how much improvement I'm making. Good.
Yeah. Okay, we are closing in on 2 hours. Any final thoughts? Yeah, I was just like looking over a couple of mine recently. Like they're not the best, but it's okay. You also have a much smaller audience when you start out, so you can make mistakes and try stuff.
Yeah, and you learn as you go, like you were saying, Bethany. Like you figure out, not only like learn how to do it, but you figure out what works for you. Like when I very first started, I did a lot of the more common videos. Like I did, you know, monthly TBRs and like monthly hauls sort of thing. And I realized that monthly doesn't really work for me. And so now I do seasonal TBRs, and I do hauls twice a year because that's what works for me. And you'll figure out what you like and your style, how you like to talk about books and things.
Yeah.
JD.
And you can private the old stuff.
That's true, you can. I haven't really, like, I've privated a couple of things that like I think were like overly negative, that like are not what were like things that were too, I don't know, like there's a couple of things, but not just because they were bad. Like like the handful of things I've privated, there were other reasons for it. So yeah. Next video and discussion.
Well, when I started out in this community, I was completely different. So a lot of my videos I have privatized simply because my niche changed. And I've had so much controversy with, you can't talk about multiple things on your channel and be accepted in a community because you don't fit a mold. And so for me, it's like, okay, let me delete all of this, you know, nostalgia and children's content and stuff like that. And then too, with the COPPA compliance, I deleted a lot of that kids content because I was kind of afraid of what was going to happen with that. And so now that I'm primarily horror, it's just like, you know what you're getting when you come to my channel. I'm going to scare you in some kind of way. So.
That was very creative. Beth, I saw you said you're considering a channel. You should do it. That would be great.
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah.
I'm starting mine at 39, so you know.
Hey, go for it. That's awesome. Yeah, do it. I mean, and this is, you know, and there are a lot of people who are in other countries, honestly. Like there are booktubers in Australia. There's quite a few booktubers in Australia, actually.
Yeah.
Of course, their names are currently escaping, but I follow a couple of them. There are booktubers in Australia and like all over the world. There's like Noria Reads, I think, is from Nigeria.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So go for it. Why not? All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining and for a great conversation. And good night to everybody watching. Hopefully this was helpful and fun.
Thank you.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Bye.
Everybody.
Bye.
Goodbye.